Okay, so let's start today by working on our do now. I'm going to go to classwork, scroll down to today. Today's date is 5/17, so we're going to click on this one. You're going to put your name on your do now, so write your name in here. You're going to click on first period. And then again, up to this point in class, again, we've covered the 9 rules of composition. So we've talked about the rule of thirds. Remember, on your camera, you can turn the grid on, and that helps you align to the rule of thirds. Remember, when we're looking at things for the rule of thirds, we want to kind of hit where those lines cross on the grid. We looked at things that are balanced, right? And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. We talked about leading lines. Remember, that's where your eye follows something. We talked about symmetry and patterns. So symmetry means it's even on both sides, and it's asymmetrical if it's uneven. And then patterns are just anything that repeats. We've talked about framing, which basically means like you draw somebody's eye to one specific area by kind of getting rid of some of the outside areas and kind of having them zoom into something. We talked about showing depth, or things kind of overlapping as they go back in space. We've talked about creatively cropping things to make them more interesting, and then thinking about the role the background plays in your photograph, and also your viewpoint, thinking about a high angle, like looking down on something or looking up at something to just get a better viewpoint to make it more interesting, okay? So this week our focus is architectural photography. So we're looking at buildings specifically. So as we look at these buildings here, here's image 1. This looks like it's an abandoned building because I see some spray paint and stuff in here, but it's got some really interesting things happening. And here's your second architectural photograph here. This one is changed to black and white. This one still has some color in it. It looks like it's black and white because there's a lot of contrast, but it's actually color. This one is all black and white. All right, so looking at these two images closely, I want you to determine which one of these rules that we talked about do you think is showing up? And just do your best guess on what you think. So is it framed, where we're focusing on a specific area? Is the lighting what stands out the most to you? Has it been cropped in an interesting way? Does it use any blurring? I know last week for macro photography, we had a lot of things with a blurred out background, so blurring was an easy one to choose. Leading lines, I added in here, so remember with leading lines, your eye follows the lines. So do either one of these have some lines that your eyes follow? And then symmetry. Remember, symmetry means it's even on both sides. So if I look at these, this one isn't quite even on both sides, right? Because there's only a staircase coming down in one that we can see. This one is pretty close to symmetrical, so that may be an option for your second one, okay? So go through and answer these two questions. And when you're done clicking on those, remember to come back to Google Classroom. Come back to Google Classroom and hit the turn in button here, okay? Because just because you complete the do now, it doesn't show up as turned in until you hit that turn in button, okay? So get your 2 questions answered and then hit the turn in button. I'll give everybody a minute to do that, and then we'll get started talking about our topic for this week. Okay, so up to this point in marking period 4, we have covered portrait, which is just pictures of people's faces, right? We've covered landscape or nature photography, which is obviously taking pictures outside in nature or of natural things, or taking pictures of landscapes, which is just like a scene with nature. We've done still lifes, and a still life is where you have a setup of objects on a table, right? That you zoom into. You want to have like a really interesting shot. And then we had macro photography. And macro photography is small objects really, really zoomed in, okay, with a blurry background. So those are the things we've covered so far in marking period 4. Now you know that there's no penalty for turning in things late, but just know, like, if you don't turn things in by the end of the marking period, I'll have to go back and give you zeros for everything. So it doesn't matter like when you join the class, you're still responsible for making up the content because it's fairly simple to do it. Some people even have these pictures already on their phone. So go through your phone, look at the pictures you've taken, and maybe some of these might apply to the different topics we've covered in class, okay? So those are the things we've covered up to this point. This week, our focus is architectural photography. So your learning targets are, can you identify architectural photography? Can you explore different types of architectural photography? And can you use the 9 rules of composition, those ones we just reviewed for the do now, in your actual photographs that you're taking of your buildings? So the main focus here is capturing interesting buildings and then the structures that are just around us every day, but maybe using a different viewpoint, right? Try to showcase the building itself, some of the details it has that are interesting, or maybe you just kind of change your angle, look at reflections, think about the building not necessarily as just a structure that you're just trying to take a photo of, but maybe as like shapes or lines. We'll talk about that in a little bit. So you're trying to think about this building in a new or creative way. For architectural photography, you could take them inside of buildings or outside of buildings. One of the major things we'll talk about is that you want to make sure you don't have too many other distractions. The focus should be on the building, okay? So this one is kind of under like an overpass here, so it's actually kind of inside this colonnade, but it's looking out at another building. So it's kind of inside and out at the same time. This is like a stairwell, and I've seen quite a few people who have taken pictures of like inside their house like stairs or outside like their apartment stairs, and they look great. They're really interesting shots because they have tons of leading lines, right? So let's talk about leading lines. When we look at this one, we have the shadows right here up front, and our eye follows that curve. In addition to having the leading lines here, it also frames this other building. Remember, framing is kind of like, how do you focus on something else? Like kind of put a frame around it. This is like a frame for this building right here. So that's why this photograph is just a really interesting photograph. And a lot of times you'll see that the architectural work, the photographs are changed to black and white because they want you to kind of look at the lines and the contrast and like not necessarily all the other details. So you've got to think about if you're taking your pictures inside, try not to have any other distractions. You want to just focus on the elements of the building, okay? Or you can do it outside, kind of looking up buildings, like as you're walking into the school building or as you're walking into your apartment building, just take a picture like angled up, really like interesting shots, okay? So inside or outside. Again, the focus on architectural photography should be the building, not the decorations. So not decorations, people, nature, nothing else. It should be the building only. Okay, so let's look at these examples here. This one, the focus is on the staircase. That's part of the building. That totally works. This is like an element of a sign, right? And the building behind it totally works. This is just a shot like looking up the side of a building. That totally works. This has flowers in the front and a building in the back. Now let's look, because if it was just the building in the front and it was in high focus, it was really sharp and defined, this one may work, but it's not. The flowers are the focus because the flowers are in focus. They're very clearly defined, and the building is blurry, so the building is secondary. So this would be an example of a nature photograph because more than 50% or about 50% of this is the flowers. Okay, so I want you to see the difference. You've got to make sure the focus is on your building. Here's one that has a person in it, but the focus is really on the building, right? It's like they're obviously on like a second or third floor taking a picture down, giving this really interesting shot. But look at this one. Here we have people in front of buildings, right? This one is definitely about the people standing here, even though it's like cool, like with the sun shining through and it's that nice drama and stuff. There's buildings in the background, but the focus here is the people. This is not what we're looking for. We want the focus to be the buildings, okay? So if you have pictures on your phone of buildings and there's some people in it, maybe they're secondary and the focus is on the building, then you're okay to use it. But if it's like this one, somebody standing in front of a building, that's just not going to work because the reason you're taking a picture of that person is you're trying to get that person in the picture, not the building, right? So you've got to make sure whatever you choose or whatever pictures you take, that the focus is on the architecture, not the people or other objects around it, okay? And again, one of the things that really stands out, and we see a lot of the images with architectural work, they change it to black and white because of the contrast. It really stands out. But geometry, so the different shapes, the different lines, the different angles, the reflections even, we'll talk about that in a minute. All of these things are what make those buildings stand out and be unique. And it doesn't have to even show the whole building. You can just show part of the building in kind of a creative way, and that would work because it still relates to architecture, right? So we're focusing on geometry and shapes, again, changing to black and white, making the contrast stand out, and looking for these angles and lines. Because again, we do see a lot of leading lines. So think about that viewpoint that we talked about before, having high angles or low angles, okay? So high angles, you can just angle your phone up to look up a building. It creates a really interesting shot. Or if you're up on a second floor or a third floor, or maybe your apartment is on the fourth floor and you can look down your window, that could be a really interesting thing to kind of get the building as you're looking down. Obviously, be careful, don't drop your phone. Think about balance. A lot of times in architectural photography, they show things that are pretty symmetrical, right? So symmetrical means it's even on both sides. So here's an example of symmetry, even on both sides. And you could easily do this with cropping. You may have taken the picture over here, right? But you can crop it so that it looks like it's centered. So it's up to you. Or you can have something asymmetrical, which it means it's uneven, right? This is bigger on this side, it goes down over here. I think an added element of this is that like the sky color really adds to this. So that's something to think about, right? So look at the features of the building that you're trying to kind of focus in on. It could be repeating patterns, right? It could be just really interesting exterior or interior details of your building. So maybe you have like a really cool like door frame that has like something like elaborate around it, you know, when you enter your building, or maybe there's like a statue outside of your building, or you walk past the building downtown and it's got really cool architecture. Take a picture of it. Think about how you can angle your shots to get a more interesting photograph. And it's always a good practice to take multiple pictures at one time, because if you go from different angles, it may look better once you look at the final picture. So if you're around some buildings or if you're on the bus, you're taking pictures, like, you know, take a whole bunch at one time, and then you can go back through your phone and look and see what's the best. Okay. And again, try to zoom into areas, experiment, try to have more artistic looking things, because again, we aren't really just trying to document, hey, here's a building, this is what it looks like. We're trying to make it like, hey, this is my artistic interpretation of photographing this building. Okay, so we're not just trying to document something and say, this building is here. We're trying to say, look at this really cool part of this building. Okay. And talking about the sky, the time of day could make a really big difference. I have seen some really cool photos that people turned in of like sunset. So that might be perfect. Like if you are able to take a picture out your window and see some buildings outside of where you live at sunset, or, you know, if you're up early enough at sunrise, or maybe you take it at night. So when we have a downtown area that's fully lit up, that looks really cool as well. So think about like the time of day, because that could be like a factor in a high quality image. The other thing that we often have is many of the buildings have tons of glass, so we have really interesting reflections. So look around you to see what kind of reflections, and check and see what's being reflected. So I mean, if it's showing like, you know, a not very good scene, like trash cans or something, you may not want to have that reflection. But if it's like reflecting like a blue sky, or if it's reflecting other buildings, that could be a really cool thing. So, and also there's the opportunity to reflect in water too, right? So maybe, you know, you take a picture when you're seeing some reflections in some water, there's a body of water, there's a river, there's a pond, whatever, and that could be something that's really cool. So you can have still architecture with a little bit of a reflection with nature, okay? Again, always the building for this one should be the focus. So make sure it's not just nature focused. And again, there's tons of things around where we live that you can take pictures of, either walking or in your car. So just look closely around you at all these things that you see every day. You can even take pictures like if you're on the bus is stopped, look around you. If you're going through downtown, take some different pictures. You know what I mean? Like you could take these pictures very quickly, like if the bus is stopped or if you're walking somewhere, and just look around all these interesting buildings because we have tons of really cool architecture around us. All right, so every week we have the same thing. We have an inspiration sheet that we have to make, and then we have to take a whole bunch of pictures and then choose our 5 best ones to turn in. And don't forget to edit them. Again, a lot of these pictures for buildings are black and white just because it really stands out. So you're welcome to do that and make all your pictures black and white this week if you want to. But let me walk you through, just for some of the people who are newer, how to do an inspiration sheet so you know exactly how to do it. So we have 2 things every week, an inspiration sheet, and then we're taking photos and turning the 5 best photos in. So let's go and do an inspiration sheet for architectural photography. So I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to open a Google Doc. I'm going to make a new one. I'll hit blank. And oh my goodness. Architectural photography is what we're looking for. So I am going to just underline that. Now let's find some inspiration. So I'm going to go to insert image. And again, this is the easiest way. You can go back and forth between Google, but you can just look it up right here in the doc. So I'm going to search the web, and I'm actually going to look for this. So I'm just going to paste that over here. And let's get some ideas. So I'm not traveling to London, so probably Big Ben is not going to work for me. But I probably can take a black and white picture looking up at some buildings. So that one's one I can use. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get that high to take a picture like that, but this is a close-up of a building. That's pretty cool. I could probably do something like that. And this one's interesting because it has a sun going down here, so I like that one too. All right, so these are the 3 ideas that I'm taking from Google to kind of get my brain going on what I want to do for the week. I'm going to resize them, make them a little bit smaller so I have room to think about them and write something down. All right, so let's look at what are my 3 ideas. So my first idea, and I do not need this underlined. So my first idea for this week's projects, I'll just put photos, is to take a picture or take some pictures looking up at buildings downtown and change them to black and white. All right, so what's my second idea? So my second idea was right here that I found on Google, just kind of get my mind going. Hold on, let me fix that real quick. All right, so my second idea is I will look closely at some buildings around where I live and take some detail photos and crop them in an interesting way. I mean, that one's changed to black and white again, but maybe I want to change it to black and white, maybe not. I don't know. I'll leave it just kind of open. And then my third inspirational image that I found from Google, I like this one because not only does it have the sun here, but it has a little bit of a reflection. So I will look around where I live at the buildings around sunset and see if I can get any photos that show reflections of the sunset. All right, this is what an inspiration sheet looks like. It's literally just 3 ideas that you can find on Google. Again, your pictures don't have to look exactly like this. This is just 3 ideas of what you want to do for the week. Okay? You'll go out and you'll take a whole bunch of pictures and you're just going to turn in your top 5. But these are the 3 broad ideas that are going to get you going for the week. All right? So you'll turn in this Google Doc for your inspiration sheet, and I'll come back over here. So right here, inspiration sheet, this is where your Google Doc will go. You'll turn it in here. Mine looks different because I'm a teacher. I don't have the turn in button. And then once you take your photos, you'll turn your photos in right here under photo shoot. Some people sometimes get them like confused from week to week, but just look for where it says photo shoot. Photo shoot is for photos. Inspiration sheet is where your Google Doc goes. Okay? So those are your 2 assignments for this week. Anybody have any questions about what you need to do? And again, if you're trying to get caught up with other weeks, it's fairly easy. Just look at that week and look what the topic is, and take some photos and turn those in. Photos are worth more points than inspiration sheets, because an inspiration sheet you saw just took me like 5 minutes to do. But photos, you actually have to go out and take photos, or you have to go through your phone and find photos that you've already taken that fit the topic. Okay, so you've got to make sure that it aligns with what the topic is. But the photos are worth more points because they're studio project grades, and the inspiration is a classwork grade, so it's worth less points. But either way, try to get all of your photos turned in for marking period 4 if you're behind. All right? Any questions at all? All right, guys, let's use the rest of the time today to get the inspiration sheets done and then start taking our photos. Okay? All right, guys, have a good day. I'm here if you have any questions.